Welcome back to another episode of the Radical Narrative Podcast. I am your host, once again, Mylan Tatisis, coming at you from rural Saskatchewan. Today I'm sitting down with Ashley Callingbull. She has become a popular public figure across Canada and ultimately the world. We're going to sit down and have a conversation around acting and ultimately how she chooses what to do and what to do when there's hiccups along the way. She gave me a lot to think about in terms of how we need to be mindful in this era of public image and social media. It was really great to catch up with this longtime friend. I really hope you enjoy it, and it was a pleasure to record. So be sure to stay tuned and listen in. Awesome, great. Thanks for making time for me, Ashley. I'm really excited to have this conversation. We've known each other for a while, but we kind of fell out of touch, as life happens and our academic paths and career sort of took off. And you've done a lot. And I know you're down there in Florida right now because your partner's doing the hockey game stuff down there. So I know who you are. But if you could go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience, that would be great.
Great. Hey everyone, I'm Ashley Callingbull. I'm from the Enoch Cree Nation in Alberta. I am an actress, model, motivational speaker, and ambassador for a bunch of different organizations.
Cool. Yeah, a bunch of different organizations. I like it.
I'm like, you want me to name them?
The quickest intro ever. Cool. That works. I like it. Yeah, but yeah, a lot of people don't know this. Like when I hear people talking about you in my community, like being obviously like in academia and things like that, I'm always like, oh yeah, no, I know Ashley. Yeah, I know her from Enoch and things like that. So we kind of known each other since we were like teenagers, younger than that even. Yeah. And I think like my first memory of you, like just to position this, my first memory of you is you being like a younger little girl, and you had like full frame glasses on. You had like black full frame glasses. And you had long hair, like your hair was out and it was super long. And you and your sister shared a bedroom with a bunk bed in it. And I remember like just visiting you guys and being over there. And then I went to check out your bedroom and you girls were playing in there and you had like a bunch of posters on the wall. I don't remember what it was, but it was like the classic, like res, like little kid Disney female poster room.
I know that I had a Matrix poster of Keanu Reeves and a Kill Bill poster.
Yeah. Yeah. Then I remember you being a bit older. Another memory I have is us visiting. And then you kept like singing that Kill Bill song.
Oh, God. Oh, that movie has so many. I remember the songs that in it, whenever she was mad, it was like,
yeah, like that was your thing for a while. Is like you kept doing like these Kill Bill references and even like literal songs.
I don't know why, but like I loved everything that was like superhero-ish or just like badass women.
Yeah.
So I liked her a lot.
Cool. Yeah, Tarantino films. And then I guess we kind of went to high school and then we would just touch base off and on as teenagers. And then from time to time, but there's another curveball in this interview. Yeah, we know each other, but also the other curveball I wanted to position was that when we were talking, I think when I was first going to college and we were touching base and talking story off and on, you were a mathematics and engineering major. Like I remember math being your thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
I liked math, but only with physics. I felt like it actually had reason behind it and it made me more passionate as opposed to just doing math by itself. Yeah. And I just loved anything like science related. It was just like the super science geek in me just carried that on.
Yeah. And I remember like just knowing you and growing up and observing you. I knew you were going to do something big. And I knew that you were like, you had this vibe about doing something grand. And you did. But the curveball for me was like, you completely went away from your physics, math, nerd stuff. And I guess I find people will probably be thinking about this and be like, Mylan's painting Ashley Callingbull, right? The Miss Universe that does all this public image stuff as almost like a math nerd. But to be honest, I remember of you with your glasses and your songs and you going to college for your math that's the Ashley I knew. That's
Ashley, like the real Ashley when people see, or every time people talk about, oh yeah, Ashley with her big thick glasses and braces and her ponytail.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yep,
it's
that's
true.
me.
And now everyone gets to see like, you know, you on the PR campaigns. I remember I was at a mall once in like New Mexico shopping, and you're on like this big PR campaign at the mall, and I was like, hey, it's Ashlink. Cool.
Like, it's so random because people like see like really the glamorous stuff that I do now, or
Hmm.
like seeing like campaigns and whatnot, but they don't see like, hey, who's the Ashley underneath all of that.
Yeah, and that's probably why I wanted you on the podcast, was to kind of position you socially as, you know, somebody who I remember growing up, and also like position you as somebody who was initially into math and sciences. I'm kind of like on this big trip right now where I want to foster more conversations around STEM and math and sciences and things like that for young people to listen to. But I want to ask you the question of why did you transition away from that career track like you had initially planned?
I just kept thinking, like, what else do I love? And I felt like I graduated high school early when I was 16. I ended up skipping 2 grades when I was younger. So I really pushed myself like academically. And I also love to write. I thought that was like another really creative outlet for me. So I just went in, got my Bachelor of Communications degree and did like journalism, everything like that. And I was like, oh, I love writing stories. Like I love being around people. And I think that was so different from science. A lot of it was, science was like my own thing, like just for me, as opposed to like communications, like the human interaction is what I really enjoyed. And after that, I even went to school for radio and television and graduated with that. And I thought it was really great to have both aspects of being in front and behind the camera. And they're all just so completely different. But I feel that I really learned a lot about myself in all those different things, like different environments for sure. And I thought, why not? Why not keep going and try more things? I'm like, I'm so young and I'm like, I'm pushing myself so hard. I'm like, what else can I do? What else do I love?
Yeah, you just reminded me too, because when I think back on it, I remember you graduating high school early, which means you graduated high school like I think like just shortly after me. So I
Mm-hmm.
remember like being like, wow, this girl's like. I remember that ambition though. I remember like the nerd vibe ambition you had, and and I remember it clearly because I remember us even talking sort of about college and what I was doing, and me asking what you were going to do and all that. But it's just really interesting, and I wanted to position you as that because yeah, people do get to see, you know, like the public image you, but there's a big backstory here of what kind of got you into where you're at now today.
Mm-hmm. It's just crazy. People don't know, like they see the accomplishments now, but they don't know like I actually went to school and like spent a lot of my time as like a starving university student, like the typical stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I feel like a lot of people really limit themselves when it comes to like education too, is like what they want to chase. Like a lot of people feel like, oh, it's just this or nothing, and me, I was just kind of really open to just seeing what I can become and what I can really do with those experiences.
Yeah, totally. And I really wanted to position that as like you having been there, you having gone through education, you being a genius, because I do remember you being a genius. And I guess that flies into the face of how people try to want to position you as somebody who's doing just the public image stuff. And for me, I was like, no, that's Ashley. Like the Ashley I know, like, let me tell you about the Ashley I remember. And they kind of like try and limit your public image in that way. It's like, oh, she's just doing that, or she's just a model now, or she's just doing that because of this.
Yeah, they're like, what does she know? They're like,
Yeah.
she doesn't have experience. And I'm like, oh no, I
Yeah.
have 2 degrees and a diploma. Like I'm good.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really want to position this as me knowing you for two reasons. One, I do know you have 1 degree of separation from Hillary Duff. I would probably get her on my podcast if I could, because she was like this child star that kind of went into the mom avenue, which was cool to see. But you've also become this icon, right? So you're now this icon in Indian country where you are in the public light. And obviously that has pros and cons, obviously. But at the same time, people obviously see you, they get to hear you, but they don't really get to like listen to you on a more social level. And that's what I kind of wanted to provide people in this podcast episode with you, was just to have this normal conversation between me and Ashlink and you know, the dynamic of who you are and where you come from, obviously.
Mhm. Yeah, people just really see like anything that's in the media or whatever is really on social media as well. They don't really get to know me like on a deeper level. They don't know like how weird I really am.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm still that little girl. I'm just grown up.
Yeah, like the Ashley that would just bust out a Kill Bill song in public, like randomly.
Like, I still do stuff like that all
Yeah.
the time. I'm just very out there, but I love that.
Yeah. You got kind of thrusted into films and acting and getting into those spaces, but then you were kind of just catapulted to a whole new level after like the universe pageants blew up. Like things changed. Yeah,
Hmm.
like that for me, that was like the tipping point, like the big change to you being this big public image now, not only in Indian country, but just like across Canada and the world. Like that was like the point where I remember Ashley doing, the acting stuff with Uncle Gordon and all that cool, awesome, cool. Then all of a sudden universe pageants, and then Ashley's like this big name on posters at the mall. And I was like, whoa, that was quick.
Yeah, it is crazy how it all happened and how it all came together. But really, it was just me trying to like amplify my voice for like other reasons. And then I think that's what kind of like got people to really listen to me. They're like, oh, she's not just being a typical pretty face in a pageant. She's actually got something to say, or there's actually a backstory to her, or oh, it's kind of a hard story too. So really, like when I talk to people, they don't see like the story of like my resilience story really, or how I've come to be. So a lot of people perceive as like my success is like, oh, it's fallen into my lap or it's been really easy. I'm like, but it's actually been really hard to accomplish everything. Like not just as a woman, but even as an Indigenous woman, all the things that I'm doing that's mainstream, it's not easy. And I feel like I'm fighting just to create space for myself and other women as well. So it's a hard industry to be in.
Yeah. And I kind of pick up on that vibe, like me knowing you and observing you growing up and, us being like family friends and things like that. I do know you're in like a struggle. And then like what really pissed me off like the last few weeks was like how people were targeting you on social media. And I was like, no,
Yeah.
I don't like that. Like I was getting pretty irked by it. And a lot of people have lots of things to say, but at the same time, that I don't think people understand the social element of who you are in context to the overall landscape. So that's kind of what I wanted to sort of position here. Was sort of like that whole dynamic that's unfolding in the panoramic view.
Hmm. I feel like a lot of people can be really encouraging to me, like say like, oh, Ashley thrived in this, she won this. And it's like that idea of like, if one of us wins, like we all win. But then if one of us doesn't live up to your expectations or does things the way that you think is right, it's like, hey, let's hate on this person and get everyone else to. And I'm like, what happened to empowering and uplifting each other? I'm like, it's so messed up. But that's like the world we live in now. And like people are really tough behind their computers.
Yeah, it totally is. And yeah, and that's the position you're in now. Like that's how I viewed it, was like, hey, Ashley's entering this public eye position, and obviously, she has her understanding of politics and where we're at in society and all that, and that you have to navigate that, and you are navigating that. It's not like set in stone, so to speak, in terms of like the trajectory you're taking. You're navigating that like it's a process, right? It's an ongoing process where
Yeah.
the landscape's always changing, the media is always changing, and just the fact that I think you said on Power and Politics, you said the media just doesn't listen to anybody. Like you kind of have to be and navigate these spaces and be mindful. And it's true, like they don't just listen to anybody, and they don't just like select anybody to be there, but they also select public figures. So you being this like public figure, how do you assess what you want to do? Like, how do you determine, okay, that's something I want to do. I want to promote this, or I want to be in front of that camera over there. Like, how do you assess that from your perspective?
I feel like, especially with brands or companies that want to work with me, I definitely do not want to be tokenized as like their figure where it's like, hey, this is our diversity and inclusion. This is our girl, I never want anything like that. So I feel like anytime I work with anyone, I'm like, you gotta do the work and be about what you say and actually give back to all the organizations and charities that I like help fund and whatnot. I'm like, you have to actually give back. So say, for example, like RW and Co, like being the first Indigenous ambassador for them, they actually donated so much back and created programs for Indigenous women who are in shelters. So I'm like, okay, you're doing the work. It's not just like a, hey, pay me, I'm done kind of thing, right? I feel like everything I do, it has to have like a deeper purpose to it, and that there actually has to be some kind of positive ripple effect from it. I don't want people to think that I'm just, hey, making a buck and then calling it a day. I'm like, no, I'm like, there's so much work that has to be done. And I feel like I'm constantly just trying to like open the door for other people. Like it's just a constant like job.
to build off that, I remember when like how you said you don't want to be tokenized, and I knew you were thinking this. Like I think we even had a conversation about this in the past, and like we're DMing each other and having conversations about certain things. When I saw you when I was shopping in the mall for like Christmas presents or something, and you did the Hilbert and Burke shoot when you were on the picture in the mall, I liked it because obviously it's a PR campaign. Yeah, true. But then it wasn't like the tokenized image. It was like you in this position where it was a PR campaign, but like it was just you being you, so to speak, in that photo. It wasn't like you wearing feathers or you being in like this sort of like indigenous sort of cheesy kind of portrayal. It was just you being you, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And I like that because it's like I can be mainstream too. And like you don't have to dress me up a certain way to say like, hey, look at this Indigenous woman. I'm like, I'm already Indigenous if you look at me. You know, that should be enough.
And it kind of just asserts that, like it asserts you as being in that. I don't know the terminology, and I'll probably edit it up to sound better. But it asserts you to being in that position in terms of who you are without having to force it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, just me being myself already is fine enough as it is. And I'm like, I can be mainstream too. I'm like, it doesn't matter what my background is. I'm like, but yeah, it's a battle to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you view much of what you do just in terms of like the modeling and being in front of the camera? Do you view that as art?
In a way, yeah, it can be like, especially fashion, if you're doing something to really make a statement. Yes. And like acting, I just find it really therapeutic, especially learning from like Gordon. He told me something when we were filming Blackstone. He was saying that like, this is such an amazing way to heal and like release emotions you've never felt before. He's like, it's such a powerful way to actually tell stories and do things right. And he was so right. Like I've released so many emotions, and even like just doing self-tape auditions, like I learn a lot about myself, and I love that. And I'm like, that is definitely a form of art because it's not easy, you know, especially like to do on stage stuff in front of people. You learn a lot about yourself, especially coming out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, for our audience who doesn't know, they probably could connect the dots. But my late Uncle Gordon, my uncle Gordon Tatusis, my late father's brother. I grew up with him. I remember him, you know, doing movies and then us just talking story. But my Uncle Gordon also, like, even though he was this professional public figure and actor, he was also just my uncle. You know what I mean? Like we had this social relationship where we would talk story and visit. But I remember him telling me one time that theater was where it's at. Like theater is the make or break game for like actors and actresses because it teaches you so much, like not only on the actual acting side of things, but it requires so much like emotional and mental effort to be on stage. And like I'm still a rookie because I only took one acting class in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where we had to do theater stuff. But that class was like literally the hardest class I ever had to take in my undergrad. Like it just pushed me mentally and emotionally. And I remember just having to drag my butt to class because it was required. And my acting teacher was Raul Trio. Like he's the guy who played the bad guy on Apocalypto. And
oh wow.
Yeah, he was my acting teacher. And maybe I'll tell the story on the podcast later. Maybe I'll try and even get him on the podcast. But that was like my most like challenging class in all my academic career. It was theater. It was literally being on stage and having to push the envelope of who I am as a person. Yeah, I just get stressed out thinking about it.
Yeah, it can be definitely like really nerve-wracking, especially like people doing it for the first time. But you learn a lot about yourself, and you really have to just like let go. Like, let go. I'm like, don't be stiff. I'm like, just let go and see what happens.
Yeah.
I'm like, a lot of people are just like so animated, and like you just out of nowhere, something will come out of you and you're like, wow, had no idea where that came from.
Yeah, totally. I think like my big breakthrough moment was with Raul when he stepped onto stage to like act out a scene where my classmate was supposed to act it out, and we had a big breakthrough. I tell I tell this story to some of my students and they get a kick out of it, but I'll just like, maybe I'll tell it later in a podcast series. And the audience could just stay on the edge of their seat and listen until when I do tell that story. But it's true that it's like you just sort of have these burst moments in acting and in theater. And because of that class, I think that's why it's so easy for me to lecture, to public speak, and just get in front of a class of like 300 students and talk, because I kind of been through the ringer with the theater class.
Mm-hmm. It definitely boosts confidence for sure. Like when I started doing theater, I was in high school. So I feel like I really had to get out of my comfort zone, and also being like the only native in my whole school. It felt like weird, like I was targeted or I was singled out. And I felt like I had to prove myself more almost, you know, it was like a weird situation to be in, but it really built up my confidence. And I just felt like, oh, this is a place where I feel like I really fit in. I'm like, this is where I feel like I can stand out and just like be as weird as I want to be.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that is true. And then you do have a BFA, right? Yeah. So you graduate with a Bachelor of Fine Arts.
So it's like weird that I guess transitioned over from like science to arts, but it's just passions, right? And that's why like I just push myself, like, why not try this? Why not try that? I'm like, I have the time. I'm like, just dedicate myself. And I'm like, if I love it, then it won't seem as awful to do in school. You know what I mean? I'm like, if you really love something, it doesn't feel like it's a lot of work.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then like a BFA is unique. Like I love people who have a BFA because it translates into what they do. Like they have a creative way of thinking about things and solving problems. And I think that's what I get the vibe from you is like people see the Ashley, like the mainstream Ashley, but then I know there's like gears turning behind that and that there's like an intention behind it. And fine arts people are like emotional people, like they're creative people. And yeah.
I feel like, I'm pretty creative and like odd. A lot of people that really know me, they're like, oh, you're such a weird character. You're always up to something or always doing something, you know? And I'm like, that's never changed about me. And like, I love that about myself is that that's what really like makes me stand out, especially among like my peers. And a lot of people just see like, I guess what they would call perfection, like whatever is on social media. They don't see like the weird Ashley, right? I'm like, they don't see like how much I've grown or like how much like even theater has helped me become like this person that I am now.
I want to zero on social media since you brought it up. Is how much effort goes into your social media portrayals of yourself then, if that's the case where people don't get to see the real you?
It's weird because like a lot of my posts are garnered towards like either things that I care about or brands that I'm working with. But I feel like whenever I do an event with kids, like that's how they reach me after is through social. And so I just have like all my like emotional stuff like that is in my DMs, like my messages, like talking to the kids and whatnot. It's not really like how much about what I post, but I noticed like I'm told a lot is to not post anything that's like really personal or like my private life because like being in the public eye, I have a lot of weird people trying to like come out to me or like find me, and it's like, and if I do an event, I have to post about it after, not before, because like it is crazy. Like we live in like this dangerous world where you know people have eyes on me and so I'm like, I gotta be careful almost what I post, you know, and sad. Like I had a private Instagram for a little bit and I was posting like pics of my family and stuff. But now I'm like, okay, I'm not really posting that much about them anymore because people get too involved and it freaks me out. So now it's like, hey, you can only get this public version.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard to navigate for sure. Especially like if it involves like my work. I got to keep everything super professional.
Yeah. And like you said, there's this public version and that's definitely the vibe I get from your social media. And it is conscious. Like it is true. Like even for me, just like with my work and my politics and like we just did an episode on white supremacy and I kind of like think in hindsight, like, well, will that piss somebody off enough to try and find me on social media? And it has happened. So I can't imagine like what it's like to be on the level you are with like just randoms.
It's constant, like ongoing all the time. Like I knew like people will go out of their way, like not just on social, but if they don't know where I live, like they think that I'm still in Enoch, they'll just send mail to the Enoch post office with like no box number because they don't know anything.
Oh, wow.
And that's where I'll get like jail mail or whatever. like I legit get jail mail.
I'm not at that level yet. I don't get jail mail yet where somebody's like just randomly sending my name, sending me a letter with my name on it. That's crazy.
Yeah. And then they'll give it to my mom and be like, Ashley got something from the penitentiary. We don't know who it's from or whatever, but can you pass this along?
And then I guess that also extends just to the random public people, right? So random public people probably do target you in various ways too.
Definitely. Like I feel like the one thing I don't like is that a lot of people feel like they're entitled to have an opinion on my life, and they don't know me. And I'm like, no, you don't you do not. You shouldn't even try to say this is how I should be or whatnot. And that happens a lot, is like where people say, oh, she's not doing it right, or she should do it this way, or she should be wearing this, present herself this way. And it's annoying because I realize over time that I can't make everyone happy. And I'm like, so I got to just, work on my happiness first, right? I'm like, if I know I'm doing something and it's coming from a good place, like it's coming from the heart, I'm like, I'm not worried. But then there's always going to be like some type of negativity, right? There's always going to be something or someone that just disagrees with you.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, makes sense with what you're saying there for sure. I want to zero in on your BFA because one thing that a lot of people don't realize, I find, is that a lot of people who are in public image roles like acting, theater, comedians, artists, obviously, they have a fine arts degree. Like they actually have years dedicated to figuring out what they want to do. And how they're going to do about it. Like there's a whole process there. Like I went to school with art students, right? I went to an art school for my 4-year undergrad, and I just did the academic program. But like artists, I have their whole process. Like there's a whole process to what they do, and people don't realize that even with acting, it's an art form. There's a process to it, right? So how do you approach your acting roles, and like what's your process around what you choose to do?
Yeah. So even when I get auditions and whatnot, like when I think about it, something I actually learned from Gordon was that he told me he learned it from Anthony Hopkins, which is when you wake up, imagine like you're waking up as that character. He's like, but you always have to have a piece of yourself in it, like share like a part of your story in that character, or you'll just get lost in it. And I think about that. I'm like, what can I bring from my own life into this person that I'm trying to portray? Like how deep can you go? And it's fun because like you can just make something really out of nothing. And I love that. It's such a like therapeutic way to be, and a way to like really express yourself, because you could just get like the most bland lines, but you could make it powerful, and it's just really like a way of approaching things and really being creative and just saying like, hey, why not just try this? Or, oh, just go with it. Just keep going. Like, I'm like, if the tears are coming, like the tears are coming, always try to find something that connects me with the character. And then also like something that has personally affected me in my life, bring that to the character. Right.
Yeah.
And I like that.
Yeah, that's cool. And I want to highlight that process because people overlook that, right? Because when they see like front of the house actors, they think that's who the person is sometimes. And there is that element, like you said, there is that element of who they are in that role. But at the same time, they don't realize there's an effort into construct what they're seeing.
It is definitely a process. Like say I get something and then I'm working on it for like a week or whatever. I'm like, it's so different from when I first read it. Like it's so different. I'm like, there's actually like depth and like a story behind it. I'm like, I always think like, even when I'm working with my agent, he's always saying like, well, who is she? Who is this character? What does she live through? Like what are you envisioning? Because it's not just lines. Like this is an actual human being, and people need to relate to her some way. So like those are things that I just think about.
Yeah, totally. Do you feel that like the process of that's applied to your acting also is it do you apply that to your public image also? Like do you apply the creating a character or creating like this role to your public image?
Not really a character, but I do want people to know that I'm relatable. I think that's just so important, because I feel like a lot of people say, well, how can I relate to her? She's done all these, things like that other people haven't done. But I'm like, no, like I've come from this, lived through this. I'm like, I still go through struggles here and there. So like the importance of being relatable is just so important to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. That's cool. Yeah. And I wanted to unpack that for people too, right? Is that you are ultimately like this human being.
Yeah.
You're doing what you're doing, and you're still like this human being that has, you are who you are at the same time. And then, because the attacks that are directed towards you, I really dislike them, because they're attacks directed towards you based off the image that's like the public image.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not getting the backstory of what's going into this whole process.
No. Yeah, people are really quick to judge, and that's sad. That's kind of the society we live in. Like people are really quick to like hate, and then once there's like this bandwagon of hate, it's like, hey, who else has hated her in the past or doesn't like one thing? Let's all jump on, and try to like ruin her. And I'm like, that's such a toxic mentality.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
But that's like the world I live in, because like I am a public figure. Like there's always somebody saying something, and it's crazy. And I'm like, I feel like people forget that I'm a human being, and like I have feelings too, like if you're telling me something that's like really negative or trying to come at me, like why? Like how does that make your life better? And I'm like, that's just so discouraging. And me, like I just want to empower and uplift people. I'm like, I'm not here for any of that.
What I basically want to ask, just to be upfront, is like, if there is something that, you want to revisit, how do you go about revisiting it and repositioning it if you have to? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I could see that. Well, I think like also like time has really changed. Like things that you say may not be appropriate anymore, or things that you put out might like hurt certain people. Like for example, the dress incident. I might as well just talk about it. But that actually happened 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's weird that like people are bringing it up now, and the people that loved it 2 years ago, they don't love it now. So it was just like kind of hypocritical. And I think people thought, oh, she was trying to make a quick buck and that's it. But no, I actually never got paid for that. I actually flew myself in so I could be a part of their show, because the designer wanted to make a statement on basically a white stage. Like Fashion Week there's never anything native about it. There's no indigenous models, no indigenous designers. So this is like the first time. Our whole collection was like bringing awareness to like issues that we all deal with. It wasn't just about MMIW. It was about residential school survivors. It was about two-spirited people. But then this is the one thing that people wanted to target and, slander me for without actually looking into the context behind it or the meaning behind it, and that it was discouraging to experience all that, and I talked to families, she did the work. So it was literally just a handful of people that wanted to blow it up. And then unfortunately, like when I was doing interviews, the one woman that was, making these accusations about it, what disappointed me was that instead of taking this time from like the media, like using my name to get into the media, and instead of using that time to talk about ways to help MMIW or ways to change things, she slandered two Indigenous women instead. So that was disturbing. And knowing like the designer, she's just now in the spotlight, and for her to experience something like that, and I experience slander all the time, but for someone firsthand experience on that level, someone that's trying to like reconnect and only do things out of the goodness of their heart, I was just really baffled by that, how like lateral violence, it just went straight to that. And I was thinking, that's not uplifting to our people. And I'm like, how much money she's raised for those families from that? And I'm like, and you guys are mad about something from 2 years ago? I'm like, oh, come on. I'm like, there's better ways to approach things. Like I tried having conversations, and I educate with kindness, but if they're being like threatening or any way, like I can't do anything about that. That's just like the world that I live in, really. So I just have to take everything and just handle it and deal with it. And I'm like, there's always going to be something that people are complaining about or they don't like it. That's not done to their way. But
And I think this went a step further, though. Like, this was more than just like somebody saying, okay, can she give us a comment on what took place here 2 years ago? I don't like this. This offends me today. Like, you're highlighting like the context here that a lot of people missed. But this went a step further with literal calls to violence, like people actually posting very violent, derogatory comments. And these were our own people, which just that baffled me because there is an irony here. Can you speak to that a bit and just let us know, what took place in your perspective?
yeah, after that incident, I experienced a lot of like death threats and stuff like that. And I was just thinking, like, that's just so far to take something when you're trying to stand up for, your own women, and like you're attacking your own.
Totally. And I really appreciate how you positioned even the fact that, there was a fashion week, that there was no Indigenous representation in that usually, and that this dress by you wearing it and even by the fashion designer was basically like this expression, right? To reoccupy that space and to make a statement, which makes a lot of sense when you look at it in that very specific context. But yeah, you're right, because time, goes on, and then 2 years later, it kind of became an issue. Because I remember seeing the photo, like I remember seeing the photo before, and I remember being like, okay, cool. And then when it came up again, I was like, oh wow, why is this coming up again? And then I realized people didn't realize they were sharing articles from like 2018, 2019, I think. And I was like, okay, this is like weird.
I know. It was like odd to deal with, and it just literally popped up in my memories. So I was just thinking, oh, this is really nice or whatever. And yeah, it was just, it was interesting to deal with, but I'm used to it.
Well, I don't like the idea that you're used to it. Like, that's what bugs me.
I know, that's what's so sad is like, oh, I'm so used to people hating on me or being mean to me or whatever. Like, I was even talking to my boyfriend this morning about like some of the things that people are saying to me, because like, I feel like if I didn't have the thick skin I have, like I would not be in a good place mentally to handle any of this. And I've just lived through so much that like I can handle it, but it shouldn't have to be that way where it's like, hey, she can handle it. It's okay. I'll take the slack. Don't worry. You know what I mean? But yeah, I had a talk with him today about just like being thankful for the things that I have, and just worrying about like, those who that really love me and care for me will always support me kind of thing. But it just goes back to like mental health. I'm like, you have no idea what people are dealing with in their own time. And I feel bad for like other Indigenous people, like up and coming influencers and whatnot. They're just now starting to experience like what I experience, and it's a toxic environment to be in.
And I think the big issue too, like what really bugs me about it is that when you say you're used to it, but then also there's like very clear threats of violence. And that's what's like alarm. Well, I mean, honestly, too, unfortunately, it's not alarming to me, but it just like, it bugs me where it's like, okay, this is getting too extreme where now we're actually talking about violence. And then to talk about that in position that when you and a fashion designer are positioning your artwork and everything you've done around missing and murdered Indigenous women, and then for, even especially men to comment in very aggressive, violent ways, that's what bugged me the most. Like, I was like livid when I was seeing the comments and commentary unfold in real time. It's like, yeah.
What was really bad from that experience was an Indigenous man commented, and he's like running for council in this community. He commented, oh, keep wearing that and you'll go missing next. Like, he made that comment, and then other Indigenous women defended him, saying that I deserved that comment. And I was just thinking, this is so not right. And instead of like the media showing like the problems and like how they couldn't even focus on him, it was just me. Hey, Ashley's the bad guy. You know what I mean? I'm just like, it's such a backwards way to think.
Yeah, there is definitely ironies here that are really problematic, and that's why I sat down with myself and I said, how could I position Ashley in a conversation where we are having this conversation, but we're highlighting who she is. And yeah, that's why you're on this podcast, is because I really want to like take a stance against that dynamic, but also position you as this human being that I know, that I remember growing up, and that I have a relationship to. So for someone to like actively threaten you, it really bugged me, because it's like, no, it's crazy. Like, it was just ludicrous to me, and I really hated it. Like, I hated seeing it. Yeah, and it's not to like minimize people who were triggered by the commentary, but for me, like everything we talked about in this podcast up until now was simply positioning you as an artist and the context for what you do. And literally the fact that this is a fashion designer at Fashion Week is really important context, right? Because even for my podcast in general, we always take into account geopolitical contexts. And I think I hit that home in a lot of episodes, is that we have to be really mindful of how things are nuanced in their certain conditions. So I think this kind of speaks to that. But at the same time, it overlaps, like it intersects with, the problems we have with toxic masculinity, the problems we have with like obviously social media and literally, governance, because this is somebody who's seeking office or seeking, a chief and counselor position in a community. And that's a big problem. Like that's a big societal, social, political problem in my eyes. And I think that speaks a lot to where we're at and how we need to work on our communities a bit more and a bit more in depth.
Yeah, I was just like kind of baffled by it all. I'm like, wow, people are just taking it so far and so extreme. I'm like, well, I can only just live my life, right? Like I did everything out of a good place, and like that's all I can do. And I'm like, I feel bad that it triggered some people, but they really kind of looked at it as what they thought it was. They were like, oh, well, this is what it looks like to me. And I'm like, well, art can look different to everyone. I'm like, but it's not blood splatter. I was like, that's not what it was. And I think people just kind of like jump to conclusions right away. And it was just crazy, like the violence after that and how far they took it. And I'm like, do they forget that I'm a human being? Do they forget like I have my own things going on in my life? And I'm like, you threatening, saying that I should die or that I should kill myself. I'm like, how does that help? How does that help this movement? You know what I mean? I'm like, you say you're all about this movement and like helping our women, but you're tearing down your own.
For sure. Definitely. And at the same time, I understand the art concept to this. Like I understand the fashion concept because I literally spent 4 years at an arts college in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I know that artists and even, fashion people and filmmakers and people like that love to push the envelope or simply just love to highlight things and contextualize things. And sometimes when they contextualize things, it's kind of out there. Like it's hard for me as an observer to understand. Like, my friend Daryl Lucero's paintings for his senior project was really difficult for me to wrap my head around. And that's the art world. That's how art works. And that does translate into fashion also. But at the same time, people do take offense. Like people do take offense, and we do want to be mindful of where they're at emotionally. And we don't want to obviously, like put someone through the ringer in terms of trauma again. And so with this being said and everything being highlighted, how do you go about like, I wouldn't say correcting, but how do you go about addressing something that has a lot of energy tied to it, like the dress incident? Like, how do you go about correcting that and remedying that if you have to? Because you said that time's a thing. Like, it's a thing in these public image things where, ideas change, perceptions change. And then, unfortunately, you being a Google image search, you know what I mean? There's going to be photos from like 2015, 2017, 2018. And I mean, does that mean that people could just go and pick something from 2016 and have an issue with it? No, right? There's ways we have to like, we have to like have a conversation about this. So how do you go about like remedying it when somebody has a problem with it?
Well, like for that instance, like I spoke to a bunch of families, like, saying like, I'm sorry that this is what you perceived it to be. I'm like, honestly, it meant no ill will. It's like, I meant no harm towards you at all. I'm like, that was not my intention. But I had to also explain like the meaning of it and also like what the designer is going through. And I felt like I was the middleman, because I'm just wearing the dress. I'm like, I didn't design the dress, like nothing like this. I'm like, holy cow, like there was just so much to go through. But I feel like even if you do make a mistake, like I know down the road, like I'm not perfect, like mistakes can happen or whatever. It's just all about really being accountable for your words and your actions, right? But like if you're in the wrong, it's just always about being accountable and just kind of owning up to it. But in situations like that where people take things out of context, it's like I almost have to just defend myself. You know what I mean? I'm like, I have to defend myself, but then also like I'm going to still stand up for what I believe in and what I think is right. I'm like, that's my opinion too. I'm like, don't forget, I'm entitled to an opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's true too. You are entitled to an opinion, right? And your stance. And I think you are unpacking that for us. Like even with the concept or the dynamic of us talking about art, you're back. I hope people are picking up on like, the fact that this just isn't. I would even argue that you're not an influencer, like because I find like the modern contemporary influencers based off what am I trying to say here? Like it's forced. Does that make sense? Like
Mm-hmm.
some of it's really forced to the point where like for me, I view some things as too cheesy for me to fully endorse. Like when I see a Instagram or a profile that says influencer, like I usually just kind of avoid it. I don't follow it.
Mm-hmm.
But the big difference between you is that you're already there in a space where you're navigating these things in real time. Because I think influencer only became like a term like in the last 2 years or 3 years, right?
Yeah.
And it's more like social media enforced. I think you've like made that jump into public image, and yeah, like that's why I wanted to highlight who you are as a person first and foremost, prior to you being that big jump as being somebody who participated in beauty pageants or being an actress and being in the limelight in that way. I'm like, no, let's take this to the ground and have a really good conversation with Ashley because she is Ashley.
Yeah, I'm like, well, that's just like what you guys have seen, I'm like, there's just a whole nother dynamic to me. And like, I obviously have to be careful with what I post. And, a lot of my work is online now. So I'm like, that's just like the
Mm-hmm.
world I live in. I'm like, but when I'm off social media, I'm just completely myself. And I feel like that's a really good time for me to just
Yeah.
recharge my soul, stay away from the toxicity of it
Yeah.
all. And it feels good because like I'm still living my life. I'm still doing like the things that I love to do. Like I'm like learning guitar. I never thought I was going to do that. Like going to dance class, like living my life, still just doing things. But I don't post about all
Yeah.
that. I post about things that, when I try to actually make an impact. That's like the whole point of my social media is like, hey, how do I make an impact with this initiative or whatever? Like I use social media really as a tool to like
Mm-hmm.
connect and,
Cool.
make a reach with people and whatnot. It's not really a place where I go and put all my personal stuff on anymore because it's not
Yeah.
safe for me to.
There's this dynamic where I find like the younger generation is falling into like the need to put personal stuff on Facebook because it's so like tied to who they are. Like social media is a part of like their generation, right? Like the younger generation beneath us, where it's like you are public, you
Mm-hmm.
post these things, but then you're highlighting like this really conscious effort to not be that public and to be really like concentrated in terms of your social media, which kind of flies in the face of what I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
young influencers are falling into of being more public and be more accessible. But no, like for you, it's something like it's the opposite, where it's like you have to be conscious because like obviously we just talked about you're under the threat of violence.
Yeah, I have to like it's sad that I have to be careful with what I post and especially like even with events that I had before COVID happened, I had to just always post where I was after the fact because people would try to show up or people that weren't invited to these events or like someone it was a crazy story actually. A guy flew all the way from Paris and showed up to Vegas and he had no money. So he walked the Vegas strip to like come find me at a convention center, broke in where there was security, showed up and he had like a backpack on and he was sweating and he came right up to me. He's like, oh, I'm your biggest fan. I came all the way from Paris. I found out you were here. And then he tried to follow me and security had to like get him to leave because they didn't know what was in his backpack kind of thing. And he just broke into the whole convention center. And I was just thinking like, wow, like that's how easy someone can reach me. So then after stuff like that, I'd have to post after.
Yeah.
Be like, oh, I just did this event. Yeah. Cause people also like again, they forget I'm human. And people just come up to me and they want to grab me or hey, can I get a picture? They grab me, and move me. And it's like, hey, I'm eating. Or I get followed into the bathroom and I'm like, I have to pee. I'm like, why are you waiting outside the stall?
Crazy.
So it's just odd, right? So I feel like now because I'm in Florida and like things are different down here, if I live my life, like no one's bothering me.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is definitely the place where I can recharge and just relax and be myself and not have to worry about really anything. And that's why I'm taking like this whole pandemic thing kind of in a good way because it's just really time for me to just relax and recharge and just focus on me instead of having to just constantly travel everywhere and exhaust myself.
Mhm.
Because all these things that I do, it's just me like giving myself to people, like me sharing my energy, and then everyone taking it away from me, and then I'll have to go back and relax. And now it's like I finally can build myself up again and do things that I love, and kind of just be on my own for a bit. And I like that.
Yeah, I was even talking to other colleagues who said that, working from home was like a dream come true. I don't know where they're at now today, just in terms of like, guess being a year into it. But even for me, there was like this hindsight clarity where I realized I was commuting way too much. Like I was sitting down in my front seat of my car driving way too much, and it wreaked havoc on my body. So I'm trying to get out of that now. But I mean, I think that's a goal we all have is to be in a space where we could just concentrate on ourselves and be happy. Like finding a place of happiness, I think, is really important for a lot of people. And it sounds like, you do have access to that right now, which I think is a pretty radical act to, maintain a space where I'm going to be happy and this is what I want to do and I'm going to do it. So that's really cool. And yeah, like I think like for me too, like a lot of the work that you do now is centered around like, and even like an industry standard of like beauty, like the portrayal and the structure of what it is to be a model and to be on marketing campaigns. But again, like when I think about your work with Hilberg and Burke, where you were in malls all over the world, like there's a marketing campaign, and I was like, hey, that is you. And yeah, again, like I remember being in Albuquerque, New Mexico shopping, and I was like, hey, look, it's Ashlink, because I always remember calling you Ashlink. And even in our text messages.
I know.
And then at the same time, it was you, and sort of like this, it was you, yes. And I see that, and I saw that, and I thought that was really cool because it's not giving into the cheesy Indian cliche. But then at the same time, it is you in a mainstream marketing portrayal, right? Which is that sort of certain type of portrayal, right? That action shot with your jacket blowing in the wind and your hair having that little like almost semi like blow downwind, so to speak. But in your most ideal world, right? Since we're talking about like, the projects you like and things like that. What's the most ideal project that you would like to work on, and how do you avoid being tokenized? Like, how do you avoid that?
That's just like the one thing I try to avoid is like the whole token thing. Or I know some brands have approached me where they're like, can we do this, but we want you in this or in feathers or whatever. We want people to know. And they just want that for really the buyers, right? And I don't like that. I'm like, I'm already native. I'm like, isn't that enough? Yeah. And I'm like, I want really to be at the point where that shouldn't have to matter. Why do I have to? And I'm like, I don't want that to be the only space I want to fight for. Is like, hey, just this one Indigenous woman doing this. I want to be able to do what everyone else is doing. I'm like, why? Like, why can't I? You know what I mean? And like, even with acting, there was this role where I was auditioning for, and then it came down to me and another girl, and the casting director said that, well, because she's Native, like we can't cast her because no one will relate to her because she's Native. They're like, so we have to cast either a Black girl or a white girl. They're like, that's just the way it is. And I'm like, really? Like my race is like such a big deal. I'm like, I'm a human being. I'm like, how many times I gotta say that, right? I'm like, even in that world, I have to deal with that. So I'm like, one day, hopefully, like I could just fit in anywhere. It's just like, I have to work harder because I'm Native, like they're like, oh, we don't want that kind of look, or, oh, we've never seen that before, or no one's going to understand,
That's true. Yeah. It's like, it's almost as if like, yeah, I get what you're saying and what you're saying here, because it's almost, I did an episode with a young filmmaker, and she always like took offense to how like natives had to be natives in films. Like it was a specific, like, almost like a placement. And then they like, she made the joke about the jean jacket, how they always have to wear a jean jacket, but like, we don't even own jean jackets. Like I don't own a jean jacket, but like there was this need to like have that portrayal, right? Where it's almost like you're just like tokenized and put there as a backdrop or to fit that character. So it makes a lot of sense that you're striving to get this media portrayal where it's, I don't know the terminology. I guess I should have researched the terminology. It's not ambiguous, but it's also like it's centered, like it's assertive. It's who you are and what you are. It's not forced. Yeah. It's not forced.
Exactly. It's not just like, hey, only Native rules, It's like I can be whoever I want to be kind of thing. And like my agent, like she'll send me a bunch of stuff now where it's like, hey, like it's not just a Native role. She's like, it's like, it can go to anybody. And I'm like, I like that because then I'm not just classified in that one group. Hey, she can only look like this or do this.
Yeah, and a lot of artists feel this way. Like, for example, like if I wanted to do abstract art or, jump into acrylics, I would probably just want to be like an acrylic artist. But then, society will be like, oh, he's a native acrylic artist. So there's like pros and cons to this, and people have their own take on it. But this is like a conversation I find a lot of creative folks have, where they just want to do what they do. But then they get put into this box, right? And it's just like, we need freedom and autonomy to be able to do what we want to do ultimately. And it shows up in our work. And that's a fact.
I'm like, let me branch out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's cool. I like that. Yeah, I really like that. So in that case, are you working from a place of where you get to be yourself right now? Is that something you're looking for? I mean, obviously you said you're looking for it, but let's speak to that a bit. Like how do you want to be yourself right now?
To me, I just always try to be myself, especially like in this industry. But I feel like sometimes people want me to really put out an image that's like good for them kind of thing. Or they're like, oh, can you really highlight the fact that you're Indigenous, And I'm like, why?
Yeah.
I'm like, you want me to highlight that one thing? And, there's so much more to me as well. I'm like, don't try to tokenize me again. I feel like that's something I always have to avoid. It's so common now, especially with all the brand work that I do, because everyone's trying to be inclusive now. Yeah. So I'm like, I just literally just got to be myself and show like what's different about me. And I'm like, it's not just my skin color.
Yeah. Totally. It's funny because when we sat down as a team to plan our podcast, we intentionally planned it not to be Indigenous, like be Indigenous passing. Like we wanted it to be ambiguous. We didn't brand it as an Indigenous podcast. Mm-hmm. We just figured that, the content, and as we build up our tiers of guests that, obviously they'll be Indigenous. We'll be leaning towards Indigenous guests who are really critical and conscious of things. But then when we launched it, all of a sudden we became an Indigenous podcast. And it's kind of like, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because we want to do what we want to do. Because I want to interview guests who are non-Indigenous. Like I want to interview somebody like, I don't know, just like random, like Larry Bird or somebody, and just have a conversation. But it seems like we got segmented right away into being an Indigenous podcast. And it kind of just like, it was funny to us because we didn't even try. It's just like, oh, there's another Indigenous podcast. This is who they are. Yeah. And we actually have literally like a non-native on our team, right? Like Peyton Jackson. She's like a lady from a young woman from rural Saskatchewan. So it's just funny how that unfolded. I mean, it's not equivalent to like you being who you are, our little rinky dink podcast that's up and coming, but it's just funny how there's this double-edged sword where it's cool that we do get representation, but at the same time, there's limiting aspects to that representation that could, be negative.
For sure. It's like, oh, hey, we're going to have representation for you, but you have to be this certain way or like this type of representation. And I'm just like, they're like, only show this much or only be this much. You know what I mean? Don't be too native or you're not being native enough. I'm like, really? Like, that happens.
Yeah, totally. And we were mindful of that. Like we literally have a non-native person on our team and we're trying to navigate how to, approach this in the future. And I jokingly said, I want Hillary Duff on this podcast, but it's true. We do want her on here. But in general, I want more people to become critical of this conversation in terms of representation. And there's more to it than just getting the brown face where you want the brown face or the Indigenous person where you want the Indigenous person. So what are your plans now? Where do you plan to go with your career? Any future plans in general? Any curveballs you have planned for people? Things like that. Just a general question.
I feel like I want to continue on the path that I'm on and see what I can really make of it. But eventually down the road, I've been working with people in different companies trying to come up with ways where I can have my own foundation someday. I feel like there's just so many different ones all over the place. And I feel like I raise a lot of money for a lot of them that are just local or whatnot, like shelters, for example. Like when me and my mom were living in Homeema before we went back to Enoch, there was no shelter for us to escape to. And I feel like that's what a lot of reserves need for sure is like a safe place to really kind of start over. And so I help a lot with shelters, but I really, really want to like start my own foundation where I can build those all across Canada for like women who are at risk or experiencing domestic violence. Like that's something that I want to do and like really grow into. Like, so I'm kind of trying to like go on that path where like I can give more. and do more. And instead of it just being about like my career where I don't have to focus on the entertainment aspect anymore, like what more can I do for people kind of thing. Like, because eventually I have to go back and like give back like within my own community somehow. I feel like, yeah, I'm trying really hard to succeed out here on my own, but eventually I want to go back.
Mhm.
You know, I want to go back to, you know, where I came from and see what good I can do and what good I can bring back. And I feel like that's just like the one thing that like we really suffer with, like our women. And I feel like if I had that, it probably would help me a lot instead of having to really suffer back when I was younger.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. So long-term plans is give back to the community and be in a space to be able to give back, right? So it sounds like that's an economic drive for you, is to be in a space where you could, live the life you want, but obviously help your people.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like I want to be able to do well enough where like I can be in a good place myself, and then just not have to worry, where I can actually just continue helping live my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to have to struggle. So it's like a long-term plan where I have to actually like really go into these planning stages and really think about it. And it takes time. It's not something that's just going to happen overnight. And, you know, times are changing. So like I might have to make it something bigger, or I might have to target more people.
Mm-hmm.
But like that's honestly like what I want to do, because, you know, watching my cookum like helped so many people growing up, and then watching her like raise all those foster kids and stuff. I just wanted to be like her. So I'm like, I'm gonna find my own path, how I can help women, because, you know, she really helped me a lot, and lots of women that would come to her for help. She always knew what to say and how to like make them feel better and how to help them on the right path. And I'm like, I want to be able to do that, but it like in my own way. And I feel like that's the way.
Yeah. That's really cool. So let's jump into a conversation where I kind of want to like provide our audience and our listeners kind of like the image of who you are behind the scenes. Not too much. I mean, just answer what you're comfortable answering. Because obviously we did talk about like how there is this very real public image you have and you maintain, and not too many people get to see behind that. But like just in general, just to be down to earth, like how do you spend your free time aside from working out on your Instagram? Because you've been uploading a lot of like workout videos on Instagram, but I also know you're up to something. Like I know that Ashling's up to something where she's probably doing something crazy and whimsical too.
Yeah, so basically like a day in my life here in Florida is like I get up, and my boyfriend has like hockey, so he's living his own life, living his dream. And I basically just hang out with my dogs all day. I'm like, and we go do things. We'll go to the park, we'll go to dog parks, or we go to the beach, but I'm not like posting every day what we're doing. Go to the beach, go work out, and then say if I have a brand thing, like that's something I got to work on, go do a shoot here. So I'm like still working and doing everything, like doing podcasts, interviews, like setting up stuff like in my living room. But then like downtime, I'm obsessed with watching Law and Order, SVU. Cool. I'm like sitting on the couch eating the popcorn that you can't buy in Canada that you can only buy here. And like starting dance classes again, and like learning how to play guitar. These are all like little things that like I really enjoy, and just really downtime.
Yeah.
I love the downtime because I feel like I'm not used to it anymore. Like my life changed so fast after, you know, winning that pageant in 2015. Like it's never been the same since. I've never been able to just be in one place and actually do things for myself. I was really living my life for other people. And now I'm like, hey, I can actually take up a hobby now. I can actually do something I've wanted to do for years. I'm like, I went and bought a guitar, and I'm getting like taught how to do it. I'm like, I love this, you know? And I'm like, in my downtime, I just watch Law and Order SVU, crime shows, hang out with my dog, you know? And it's nice to just get up and be able to do that because I couldn't do that before. I never had the time. I was always just tired.
Yeah, I think even to you just speaking to the fact that you want to be in a place where you can live the life you want, I think that speaks to a lot of people right now, is we just simply want to, you know, get in a space where we're comfortable to live the lives we want.
And it's hard. Like I can only live the life I really want, like without posting about it. You know what I mean? I'm like, I can only post so much.
True.
But it's like, it doesn't really matter like what's on social media. It's like, as long as I'm happy, the life I have off of it, I'm like, I'm good.
Yeah. And I think like the image of you sitting there eating popcorn while watching Law and Order. That's like classic Aisling to me. Like that sounds like more your character.
Yeah, like that's like my goal is to, even my boyfriend wants, is for me to learn how to play the that on the guitar.
Yeah. Exactly.
But no, like it's nice. I can be weird and, you know, just be myself, and there's no judgment.
Yeah.
And it's nice.
That's cool. People may not notice this, but you like to bake. I noticed like I think we even had like a little exchange there where you're sending pictures of your pies, and I was like, okay, cool. She's a baker now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Like,
yeah, I love it. And honestly, it reminds me of my cook so much, just because she was a cook. Like those were always good times being in the kitchen with her, no matter what we were making. It was always fun. And I felt happy. So when I do those things, I just feel like maybe she's there with me.
Yeah.
You know, it's just things that I learned from her, and it feels good. It's like things that I won't forget.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, and then like a personal question, I guess, is like, well, what's your favorite food? Like, what are the things you'd like to eat? Because clearly, I mean, of course, there's like fitness culture. Of course, you need to like maintain your health and stuff. Yeah. But there's always like little weird things that people indulge in. Like, what's your favorite indulgence?
I'm obsessed with movie theater popcorn, specifically from Cineplex in Canada. But now that I'm not there, my favorite popcorn is here, and you can only buy it in the States. It's pour over butter popcorn. You buy it like a bag, you put it in the microwave, but it comes with a little mini, it's really gross looking if you think about it, a little mini bag of butter that you pour over on top. That coffee crisp, still can't get over KFC, but chicken fried rice. I'm like, probably everything bad that I shouldn't be eating. I'm like, bologna sandwiches. I love breakfast. I'm like, those are all my favorite things, but now when I make supper and whatnot, like I am obsessed with like making anything in the slow cooker.
Yeah.
It's weird. As I got older, like I love that now. I'm like, whenever I saw my auntie get pots and pans for Christmas, I'd be like, that's the worst gift. Now I'm like, hey, those are some nice pots and pans.
Exactly. Cool. I really like what you're talking about here, because I think we're painted a really good picture of who you are outside the realm of like the front page Ashley. And yeah, that's what I really wanted to sort of highlight and capture. Is there anything you want to talk about? Anything you want to address in this episode, or let listeners know about?
Well, I think like just because, you know, from what people see, like as a public figure, like, you know, I'm still a human being. I'm still like going through my own things and my own obstacles I gotta face. So I think it's just so important for people to be kind to one another, especially like the world that we live in now. And the one thing that like really keeps me going is just like encouraging myself to just always, you know, love myself for who I am, and don't let fear stop me from trying to become who I'm meant to be. I feel that like when my cookum told me before she passed, like she told me to always dream big and just show the world what I'm made of. I think that's just so important for everyone to take into their lives, is, you know, never limit yourself, and, you know, leave a legacy behind, like do something powerful.
Yeah.
Like this is what you can do, you know, to shape people and help people learn.
Yeah, I definitely had that vibe from you growing up. Like I knew you were going to do stuff. Like I knew you were going to do something. Because I know you got into modeling early, and that was sort of like a trajectory for you. But then also like the physics thing. I honestly thought it was going to be the physics thing. Like I honestly thought Ashley's going to be like landing, you know, a spacecraft on Mars or something one day, or, you know, something like that.
I know. I was like, oh my God. I was like, I'm going to have to go to Caltech and like get my master's. I was like, but, you know, anything's still possible.
Yeah, go back to school for like another 8 years and come out with like a physics degree or something. I won't be doing that.
I loved it. I feel like school was just a good place for me to thrive and just push myself. I didn't have to worry about like now it's like what I look like or what I portray. It's just like just my brains, you know, and seeing how I can excel. I think one thing, like, especially with this podcast, like trying to show like there's another aspect to me is, you know, I mean, there's this like Ashley from Enoch, like that grew up like traditional with her grandparents, the weird girl that like hums weird songs and talks in weird voices and stuff like that. Super geeky, still am. And then there's this Ashley who's like in the public eye that's like, oh, she's a beauty queen, or oh, she's this and that. And I'm like, I feel like people forget. I'm like, people don't know. I'm like, no, those two people are the same person. I'm like, but I only share what I want to share.
Yeah, the best way like I describe that dynamic is like the front of the house and the back of the house, right? Is like you have this front of the house portrayal of what you do, how you do it, and it's public access. Like people have a public access version of Ashley that is a public image. And then there's the back of the house where you're definitely like mindful and conscious of, you know, what takes place in the front and what stays in the front, but then you are who you are, obviously on both sides, but the back of the house is like you're human, right? You're still a human, and everything we talked about here, I feel sometimes gets left out. And I mean, we're navigating it really consciously, and I wanted to make you feel safe as a guest and protect you as a guest. But I also wanted people to understand and realize, hey, no, this is Ashley, and you know, she has a story and she's a person, and you know, somebody who I grew up with. And I kind of wanted to highlight, you know, who you are amidst this like chaos and this controversy around your public image and what tends to come up for you.
Yeah. It's crazy, like the world we live in, but I'm just like legit just making the best of it and just trying to keep myself grounded and not lose myself in it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense what you're saying. And I think it's something we all need to consider in this era of like social media, in this era where, you know, people are wanting to become influencers, and, you know, indigenous media is a growing thing. At the same time, it's still mainstream media in many cases. So we have to be really mindful of it. And I really appreciate you painting like this picture of how you're really conscious with your social media. There's a professional element in it. I think a lot of young people need to hear that also, because again, you know, YouTube influencer culture is taking off, and for very real reasons. You know, it does provide our people with an avenue to make a living if they wanted. But at the same time, you know, you're even highlighting the cheese. Like there's a lot of cheesiness out there that we need to be mindful of. And yeah, it's a cool episode. I really like what you captured in terms of all the social aspects we're talking about here. And yeah, I'm excited for this one. And thanks for sitting down with us. Thanks for making time to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for letting me share, like, from my point of view.
Yeah, totally. No problem. What's the main takeaway of this podcast and me sitting with you? What do you want people to remember the most?
It's important for people to know really like what's kind of going on beneath it all, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I know I only scheduled this for an hour and a half, and I think we're at an hour and 10 minutes. So yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, stay in touch. I gotta head out, but stay in touch, and this was nice. I can't wait to hear it.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for sitting down with me and making time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Cool. All right. Well, take care and enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, you too. Talk soon.
All right. See ya.
Bye.